Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one I'll be going over 5 players that I think have league-winning upside and are going outside of the top 100 in drafts right now. So top 100 in ADP. A lot of these guys are going a lot later than that, but these are all guys that I think have really significant upside and guys that I think really could be potential league-winning guys that you're getting super late. Sleeper is sort of a fun term. It gets thrown around a lot in the industry, but nowadays with Twitter and social media and just how plugged in everybody is, it's really hard to find true sleepers, guys that nobody's ever heard of. It's not like 10 years ago when you could just pick up a magazine and find a list of players that the average guy hadn't heard of. Everyone that's playing fantasy leagues knows pretty much every single player here. So really what it's about is looking at players that are going really late in drafts that can actually return really significant upside. So that's what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at guys that are going really late and I think could have a very real impact on your fantasy team, guys that could actually make a difference for you, not the guys that are going as the wide receiver 50 but could end up as the wide receiver 40 and be a value. That's not somebody that's really going to bring your team a whole lot more production than what you'd expect out of that position. So that's how I sort of established these guys. I tried to touch on one at each position. I'll touch on 5 guys. There will be 2 wide receivers and then one at each of the other positions. And it was a lot of fun doing this one. I'll do more of these as the season goes on, off season goes on, and make sure we get you guys sort of updated and new names as well. But these are 5 really fun names to talk about for me, and I think it should be a good one. So yeah, with that, let's just get into it. Starting us off with the quarterback position, and I'll touch a lot on other rookies and everything and all the rookie quarterbacks later on. I'll do a rookie preview as well, but this is one that I really do think has a lot of upside. It's going to be Jayden Daniels. He's currently being drafted as the quarterback 18 right now, so if you're in a redraft league, that's effectively a guy that's going undrafted, and I'm honestly still not entirely sold that he's going to be a guy that makes a significant impact in the NFL. I don't know that he's for sure going to end up being a franchise quarterback, but you don't necessarily need to be a high-end fantasy producer. We've seen that in the past. Just look at Justin Fields. He's already moved on to a second team. He's a backup quarterback now in the NFL, and he was still extremely valuable for fantasy over several stretches of each of the last couple seasons. And Jayden Daniels is that exact same kind of build. He's rushed for double-digit touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. He had a 17-3 touchdown to interception ratio last season as well, which is extremely promising. That coaching staff in Washington is going to look for a guy that's going to protect the ball, and he's going to run the ball quite a bit. And I think it's very easy to see a scenario here where Jayden Daniels puts up decent enough numbers through the air that the rushing upside he offers could be massive. I think there's a very reasonable chance he rushes for 800 plus yards. 1,000 rushing yards is certainly in the range of outcomes for this guy. He's an explosive athlete. I'm not going to call him Lamar Jackson, but he compares very favorably to Lamar Jackson from all of your athletic measurables to early breakout age in college to what he did in terms of just market share of rush yards for his team. He was the entire offense at LSU, both on the ground and through the air, and was just a really dominant player. And the Commanders have legitimate weapons as well. Obviously, Terry McLaurin is a guy that we all know is an elite wide receiver. Jahan Dotson didn't exactly take that step forward we were hoping for last season, but he's still a good player. They've got good running backs out of the backfield as well, and Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Tight end room is all right with Zach Ertz and Ben Sinnott. So there's enough there. There's plenty of pieces around him that if he can just rush for 800 yards and 5 touchdowns, which I think that's a very reasonable production here or projection here. He's going to be a fringe top 12 guy, and if he can put up some monster numbers, if he gets a spike touchdown season, could be a guy that ends up rushing for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. If that's the kind of production we get out of this guy, then he's going to be a league-winning asset in fantasy. And being drafted where he is right now, he's free. It makes a lot of sense. If you don't draft a quarterback really early, just take him as your second quarterback, and he could easily be a guy that puts you over the hump over the course of the season. Next up for the running back, I want to highlight it's going to be Rico Dowdle. There's just an obvious chance here. Still, I guess that I do need to mention that Dallas could very clearly add another running back to their running back room. They've been rumored to be potentially looking into trading for guys like Najee Harris, all that. So we'll see what happens there. But as it stands right now, Rico Dowdle is really one of 2 running backs in Dallas. They do have Deuce Vaughn as well, but it's really Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott. And he flashed like last season. Just watching him play, he honestly looked at times like the better running back between him and Tony Pollard. He averaged over 4 yards per carry, caught 17 passes. That's decent production for a guy that wasn't playing a whole lot. And we really do want to target backfields that are unknown, but on offenses that we know are going to be really good. And Dallas absolutely fits that bill. I mean, if you just think back to last year, remember the Dolphins obviously had Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, and Devon Achane, all 3 going after round 10 in drafts, guys that were effectively left for dead in fantasy drafts. And you ended up with Raheem Mostert finishing as a running back 2 and Devon Achane being a very meaningful fantasy contributor. When you have these really high-powered offenses and unclear backfields, there's just a lot of opportunity here. And because we don't know who the guy is going to be, these guys end up going super late. And I think it's safe to say that one of Rico Dowdle or Ezekiel Elliott is going to be fantasy relevant, if not both of them. And obviously, what you're seeing in the projections right now is that people are sort of expecting Ezekiel Elliott to be the lead back there. I personally think that Rico Dowdle is the most talented running back in Dallas right now. Zeke has just not been himself each of the last 2 years. He's obviously just on the downhill. He's only going to be worse than he was last season, and he looked like dust all of last season as well. So we know that Rico Dowdle is actually probably more talented. He's at least more athletic at this point in their careers, and he's being drafted as the running back 53 right now. And if he can actually just win the job outright over Zeke, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Rico Dowdle has top 10 upside at the running back position. We know that just the opportunity is going to be there. If he ends up being the every down starter there, a guy that they want to lean on, he's going to have plenty of red zone opportunities. They'll throw the ball to him because there aren't a ton of receivers to throw the ball to in Dallas. Dowdle could easily be a guy that puts up a monster season just sort of out of nowhere because he's just going to be a guy that gets a ton of opportunities. So where he's being drafted right now, if you pick him up and he ends up just not winning the job, ends up being worthless, then whatever, you can cut him and he'll be available on waivers later on in the season. But if he ends up winning that job, he's obviously got a shot to be a workhorse running back on a really good offense, sort of like what happened with Raheem Mostert last season. And that sort of path here is certainly there for him. So it just makes a lot of sense to throw the dart here. Next, for the first receiver I want to talk about Jameson Williams, and I get it. The odds are not in his favor. He's obviously had relatively underwhelming first couple of years of his career, and a lot of people, and in general, historically speaking, if you have a receiver come into the NFL and not perform in those first couple of years, they're probably not going to make it in the long term. But Detroit did lose Josh Reynolds this offseason, and they didn't add anybody to their wide receiver course. That's going to make Jameson Williams a full-time player in this offense. He looked like he was getting more and more comfortable over the course of the last half of last season. Just honestly made a lot of big plays for this team. He's a guy that I really did feel like was coming into his own, and he's a guy that was just really earning favor with his coaching staff as well. He was blocking a lot better, and we know with Dan Campbell there you need to do that to get on the field, and he's been doing that. So he only played 54% of snaps last season. I would expect that number to jump closer to 75 to 80%, maybe 70%, but somewhere in that 70 to 80% range. And he averaged 15 yards per catch last season as well. If he can continue doing that, and we know he can, he's an explosive athlete, a guy that's going to get used down the field a ton. And just with how explosive he is and how good this offense is, there's a legitimate outcome here where he ends up with 10 receiving touchdowns, has just several big plays over the course of the season. 10 touchdown, 1,000 receiving yard season is absolutely within the range of outcomes for Jameson Williams, and you just really can't say that for a lot of the guys that are being drafted around him. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 50 around guys like Marvin Mims, Cortland Sutton, guys that really just don't have anywhere near the upside that Jameson Williams does. So I get it. The odds aren't in his favor. There's a very high likelihood that Jameson Williams just isn't going to pan out as a first round draft pick in the NFL, but I still do think he's extremely talented, and he is the number two wide receiver on a really good offense. Granted, he's probably the number four target behind, obviously, Amon-Ra, Laporta, and Gibbs, but he could easily see a 15, 16% target share, and if he can just be super efficient with that, there's plenty of opportunity here for him to be a high-end producer. So I think where he's being drafted right now at an ADP of wide receiver 50, that's just way too low. I think there's a good chance he really sort of comes into his own this season and ends up being a meaningful contributor for you guys this year. Next up, I want to talk about Curtis Samuel, currently being drafted as the wide receiver 52, and that is just way too low. I think we've seen over the course of his entire career that Curtis Samuel is very clearly a talented player. He's been used and heavily relied on really in every single offense he's been in when he's healthy, and he now finds himself in a position in Buffalo where there's a legitimate opportunity here for him to potentially lead the team in targets, and that's being the number one target on a probably top five offense in the NFL. So normally if you see guys like that being drafted this late, I think it's just because we don't know as a fantasy community who's actually going to lead the receiving core here. Obviously, the Bills did draft Keon Coleman. A lot of us, including myself, expect Dalton Kincaid to take a step forward. We know James Cook is going to be used in the passing game. Khalil Shakir, he's a good little player as well. And I think it's fair to say that the touchdown upside for Curtis Samuel is limited just because he's not a very big body. Keon Coleman, Dalton Kincaid, those are probably going to be the guys that lead the team in receiving touchdowns. But I do expect Curtis Samuel to be the one that's manufactured touches. He's going to be utilized all over the field. He's been reunited with former offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Joe Brady was the offensive coordinator in Carolina while Curtis Samuel was there. Back when Samuel averaged 14 PPR points per game, that's when they sort of used him as a running back quite a bit as well. I think we're going to see this team really scheme the ball into Curtis Samuel's hands a ton. And like I said earlier, when we're this late in drafts, we really want to target guys that just have a wide range of outcomes, target good offenses with unclear situations, and the Bills absolutely fit that bill. There is a scenario here where Curtis Samuel ends up with 8 targets a game in a really good offense and has a spike touchdown season, scores 8 to 10 touchdowns, and ends up being a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. And I think even where he's being drafted, if none of that pans out, he's going to be manufactured touches, especially in PPR formats. He's going to be a guy that's going to get plenty of work that you can still use him as a flex, even if things don't work out on the high end of the spectrum here. So I think his floor is absolutely probably higher than wide receiver 52, and there's obviously a ceiling for a guy that if he can stay healthy and manage to be that number one target in this offense, he could actually be a top 15 guy. So I think Curtis Samuel's definitely somebody to target. He's a super safe draft pick too, someone that I'm going to feel comfortable starting in week 1 even, and the upside is just absolutely there for a guy that could be a meaningful contributor in a really good offense. And finally, we're moving on to my tight end sleeper, and I really wanted to dig deep on this one just because, in general with the tight end sleepers, you're looking at guys that are being drafted, any of the top 15 guys, those are guys that are being drafted early, not early, but everyone's drafting them. It's really consensus, sort of chalk, and nobody really digs much deeper than that when you talk about tight ends. So I just sort of wanted to put a dart out here. I want to talk about Will Dissly, who's currently being drafted as the tight end 45 right now. Obviously, I don't think you need to draft Will Dissly by any means unless you want to throw a dart throw, just sort of late in best ball drafts right now. But I do genuinely think that Will Dissly's got an opportunity here to put up a really high-end spike touchdown season. He was given a 3-year, $14 million deal by the Los Angeles Chargers this offseason. He's just an elite run-blocking tight end, and I know that run-blocking isn't going to give you fantasy points, but he's clearly going to be the number one tight end on this Chargers depth chart. The Chargers, just Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, we know they're going to want to run the ball very effectively. And we've seen over the course of Greg Roman's entire tenure, the tight end position is one that's heavily utilized, especially near the goal line. Go back to his days in San Francisco with Vernon Davis, move fast forward to Mark Andrews in Baltimore. They are going to utilize the tight end, especially in the red zone, and Will Dissly is absolutely going to be on the field there. And the thing with the Chargers is they really don't have any receivers that you really can rely on yet. I mean, I personally think that Ladd McConkey is going to end up being the leading receiver in Los Angeles, and McConkey's just too undersized to end up being like a touchdown dominator kind of guy. And we know Justin Herbert, he's going to throw for 25 plus, maybe 30, even 35 touchdowns this season. And if that happens, I think a lot of those are going to find their way to Will Dissly. He's a guy that's going to be on the field anytime they get in close because of how good of a run blocker he is. And he'll probably just catch 6 to 8 receiving touchdowns this season if he can get a spike production there. I think there's a chance that he ends up being a 10 touchdown guy. Obviously, that's on the high end of things, but I think that is within the range of outcomes for a guy that he's flashed in the past. He averaged 12.3 PPR fantasy points per game in 2019. That was a season that was cut short for him, but he's been a guy that's performed at a high level when he's utilized. He's obviously shown he could be a capable pass catcher, and he's a guy that Chargers clearly targeted. They signed him on the first day of free agency. He's going to be on the field a lot for this team, and especially when they get near the goal line. So that's when you want your guys on the field, especially at the tight end position, especially when you get deeper on as well, especially when you're not in a full PPR league. He's a guy that they could legitimately score. 10 touchdowns is legitimately in the range of outcomes for Will Dissly. I'm not saying I'm expecting it, but being drafted as the tight end 45, I think Dissly is going to have like meaningful fantasy contributions this season. And if you're in best ball, or if you want to take a shot on a guy that maybe just ends up putting up a ton of touchdowns, I think Will Dissly's a decent dart throw to take. So that'll do it for this video. I've gone over 5 sleepers here. If you guys disagree or agree with any of these 5, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you guys have any other sleepers you want to ask me about, feel free to let me know in the comments as well. It's a lot of fun interacting with you guys. Up next, I'll be going over my 5 biggest bust predictions for 2024, so that'll be a lot of fun. And then I'll sort of get into some more rookie previews. I'll do some more mock drafts and all that, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. So really just trying to put out a lot of content over the next several months. We're going to keep pumping out videos as we get closer and closer to draft season, and then we'll be putting out videos all throughout the regular season as well. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of that, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're at like 970 right now, and I would love to hit 1,000 before the start of the NFL season. So I really think we can get there. If you haven't subscribed already, just give me that subscription, click the notification bell so you get notifications when new videos come out. And if you like the video, please do just give it a thumbs up as well. It helps with the algorithm and all that. So I appreciate all you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'll catch you next time. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.